Welcome back to Brighter Morning with Bo. We're glad that you stayed on the show. We thank the caller for calling in. And we are going to talk now to Dr. Katijah Khan, and we will engage her at this very moment. Good morning, Dr. Khan.
Good morning, Dr. Tiwari. Pleasure to be here, and good morning to all your viewers.
Okay, thank you very much for agreeing to be on the program. And given all the things that you see happening now around the world and in Trinidad and Tobago, what is your psychological assessment of where people are in relation to vaccination and the public health issues that arise versus the issue of individual choice and freedom? What is happening psychologically, you sense? I know that you can't do this by experiment or by any scientific way of determining this, but as a psychologist, you would also have an intuitive sense. What is happening?
Yes. So what we do know is that the issues regarding vaccines and people's opinions and attitudes is a very complex one and a very dynamic one. So there's no easy explanation for what might cause somebody to either take the vaccine, be anxious about it, or outright reject it. But we do know that it varies. So we know that the people who have taken it, the people who were very eager early on in the pandemic when the vaccines became available. They were the first ones to want to take the vaccine. And then we have people who were sort of adopting a sort of wait and see approach. And once they saw other people take it and they heard about its use being more widespread, then they also followed suit and took the vaccine. Some people had concerns about the type of vaccine, etc. And so as more vaccines became available, we saw more people take advantage of that. But then what we also know is that some people are still hesitant. And there are some people who are actually quite resistant. And there are some factors that help us understand why these hesitant and resistant persons feel the way they do. And so I can go through some of those with you and your viewers to talk about what might explain that.
Yes, I would like very much if you would do that, because I think an informed perspective and a perspective based on your knowledge in your particular area of clinical psychology, I think it is important to understand what is going on. I always feel that if you don't understand something, you can't make the right decisions about it. So I want to give you that opportunity to talk about it.
Thank you for that. And you know, late in 2020, the WHO also convened a panel of behavioral experts because they realized that we needed to find out what was causing people's behavior, because this was not solely a medical and health issue. A lot of people's decisions were being driven by how they feel and their perceptions, etc. So there are a number of different theories or concepts that could help us understand why people are responding the way they do. So what we do know is people's personal opinions, also the opinions of those in their bubble, those around them who have influence over them, and their own sense of control in a situation. But researchers have identified 5 C's, and I think that's an easy way to remember some of these factors. 5 C's that explain vaccine hesitancy. And the first one is a major one. It's confidence. People's confidence about the vaccine in different aspects. So the first one is about the effectiveness and the safety of the vaccine. So people are concerned with, well, what are the risks involved? What percentage of efficacy does this vaccine have? But also it relates to people's confidence in health systems. So the pharmaceutical companies that develop this vaccine, the system that is set up to deliver it. So the more mistrust that people have, it's going to fuel that hesitancy. Confidence also relates to policymakers, politicians, governments, etc. So what we are seeing, and I think this is a big factor, that when people have mistrust in these systems and authorities, etc., it's spilling over into their perception of the vaccine. So this is not just about the vaccine itself. If they don't trust, say, the governments, the pharmaceutical companies, that mistrust spills over into their perception of the vaccine. So that's where we get now. And when we have situations like that, it causes things like conspiracy theories and myths and rumors to be fueled. They run rampant. What we also know in this pandemic is that we've also had an infodemic, where we have so much an overabundance of information from all sources, not just traditional media, but now people rely so heavily on social media for information. So when we have this overabundance of information, it makes it very difficult to determine, well, what's valid, what's real, what's true. So when I hear this conspiracy theory, am I likely to believe in it because I believe, well, the scientists and the government and the university don't want me to have this information? So these are some of the factors that are fueling this vaccine hesitancy, that issue of confidence. But then there are also some practical things like constraints. So people's access to the vaccine, the ease of it, is it close by? Do they need to take a lot of time off of work? We've been hearing about people who are trying to get their boosters who've been turned back or refused. So sometimes it's some of the practical, logistic things that can influence people's opinions. So it also, and I think there have been attempts to make this vaccine readily available, but there's still some hiccups. So when you have somebody go and they get turned away, or when they can't find information about which place is currently offering and what are the times that they're offering, then these can also be things that could prohibit it. Some people are also complacent. They think, you know what, I don't think I'm going to get this COVID, and I have seen people get it and they are fine. Although we have such a high number of mortalities, we are hearing the news daily about people losing their lives to this virus. There are still some people who think, well, I'm younger, I'm healthy, I don't have comorbidities, I will take my chances. And so that could also influence whether they want to take it or not. Um, People who have a stronger sense of a collective responsibility. So people who think, you know what, I'm young and I'm healthy, but I come home to my grandmother and she is vulnerable. So I'm going to take the vaccine to help prevent her from contracting it. So people who have a greater sense of collectivism, communal responsibility, a sense of community, will find that these people are more likely to take the vaccine. And finally, there are some people who are calculating. They are weighing up the risks. So they're trying to calculate, well, should I take my chances, or should I risk the side effects? But here's the thing about that. The information you use to make that calculation, where are you getting that information from? And so we have to be careful that the information that people get is not ones that are fueled by that infodemic, and it's not coming from conspiracy theories and myths, etc. So that's in a nutshell some of those factors that are influencing this hesitancy. And I also want to say that vaccine hesitancy isn't unique to Trinidad and Tobago. It's an issue being faced by countries across the world. But what we can look at are what are the factors in our context that apply to us, and what can we tweak here to help make people feel more confident, more capable, have more, a sense of control about their own situation so that they can safely take the vaccine.
Yeah, you want to speak to that, which is to say, what are the cultural factors that are much more localized, and secondly, what are some of what is the level of customization in our approach that we have to take to allow the cultural factors and the customized approach to meet?
Well, I mentioned at the beginning that this issue is dynamic. And so the first thing we have to understand is that people can change their minds. And so we need to always have the information available to help facilitate that revised understanding. So therefore, these campaigns have to be ongoing. And we have seen some of that. We have seen that there have been ongoing efforts to help people understand more, clarify some of their fears and concerns. I think that we also need to be a lot more vigilant and speak out more when we hear about these conspiracy theories to debunk them. This is not the kind of situation where we say, well, everybody's entitled to their opinion. When there are opinions that outrightly reject science and reject logic, and we have to debunk those. So in 2021, there are still people who believe that the earth is flat, even though science has debunked that for so many years, almost centuries. So too with the conspiracy theories. When we hear people talk about, it's an implant or it's a chip or they're trying to monitor you in some way, we really have to outrightly reject that. And so I think there's a sense of personal responsibility for that. So sometimes when I get these WhatsApp forwards. How many of us have gotten these forwards through social media? Or you see it on your timeline. Have these conversations with the people who are sharing it. Sometimes people say, well, I just sharing it how I get it. No, you have a responsibility not to share rubbish, not to share things that continue to fuel people's anxieties. I think when we see things being published through various sources as well, we also need to speak up to debunk those, so that for the person who is confused, who is not sure, I think speaking up helps give them information from more credible sources. Now, the issue of a credible source is, who is that? What's that? Because we're now in the age where everybody can have a platform. Everybody can have a platform. And so what you find is that the expert's opinion sometimes is on par with somebody who does not have experience, does not have as much expertise in that area. And so I think we need to continue to encourage people to look for credible sources and why that is important. Why we need to rely more on the scientists and the researchers and the rigorous procedures and processes that they go through to arrive at their opinions, and why that has more value than the random, anonymous voice note, etc. I think that is one of the things that we are battling in this pandemic, that infodemic, where we have all of these sources that have no credibility, who are fighting on the same platform for people's attention, and in some aspects they're getting it. I think what we also want to do is
Go
avoid
ahead.
that confusion.
Sorry, I
Sometimes
didn't
I
get
think people are upset
what.
with governance.
Yeah, what did you say before? I missed it. I missed the word. Before you said some people are obsessed with governance. You said something.
Oh,
You
I'm
don't
trying to
remember
remember
now?
myself.
Yeah.
Yes,
Well, yeah,
thoughts
because
of
you were talking, you were in full flight. Yes, I understand. All right, but what is it that makes people pay attention and listen to what are essentially, what can I say, agents of misinformation, part of the infodemic, espousing conspiracy theories that undermine science and reason? What is it that makes people listen to these things? What is it psychologically that make people so susceptible? Because we can say the same thing in politics. Why are people misled by really horrible politicians? So it's not limited to this thing. It is a problem of communication and a relationship between the person in the leadership role and the person who is being playing the role of follower. What is it? What is it that allows people to be so susceptible to misinformation and
Yeah.
being misled?
Well, you just highlighted one of the factors, and this is sometimes people have these personality traits. So there are persons who are more susceptible, who are more easily influenced. And so when you have somebody who's very charismatic, putting forward an opinion of some kind, that they are more likely to want to believe that. So some personality traits do lend themselves to people believing more of that information. And you are quite right; it's not limited to vaccines. We've seen examples of these in many disciplines and across history as well. So that's one factor: people's personality traits. And I think the other factor is one that I mentioned before. When people have anxieties and fears, and also they feel a sense of mistrust in other systems, then they look for an alternative. And so, whether that alternative is equally credible or better, they're searching for something else. And so, when they find it, they're going to be drawn to it. So in your previous segment, you were talking about things like the lesser of two evils, and so that comes up. So, for example, what we've noticed, what we've seen with the vaccine hesitancy, not just in Trinidad and Tobago, but other countries, is that when people are concerned with issues of governance and policy making, etc., it's spilling over into their perception of the vaccine. And we have to be careful not to conflate those two. I think
Yeah.
people have every right to express their concerns with how things are being managed, but we can't throw the baby out with the bathwater. We can't say
Exactly.
everything then about the
Exactly.
vaccine is not correct, or it's an attempt to control or deprive people of their rights and freedoms. You have to be very careful with that.
So you can be critical of government, any government, and still take the vaccine because it makes scientific and rational sense.
Oh,
And
yes.
you can be, because you're critical of the government, doesn't mean you have to not take the vaccine as a kind of spite against the fact that you are against the government. I mean, that does not make sense for you, nor does it make sense for the community, does it?
It's a very risky strategy as well.
Yeah. Yeah, you could lose your life. Now, you said some things here, I was quite impressed by the way you outlined the 5 points, but there are two that kind of struck a chord with me, and I want to examine that. I want to examine two of them a little bit. The first one has to do with what you articulated as the sort of perception of big pharma. That is to say, I mean, the pharmaceutical companies in the world, Pfizer being one of them, certainly. AstraZeneca was developed in Oxford University lab and only became a commercial enterprise afterwards, so that you can attribute that to scientific development and creation. But a company like Pfizer or Johnson & Johnson, which I think is the largest pharmaceutical company in the world, these companies have been under scrutiny and under criticism for years about the manner in which they manage the business of creation of pharmaceuticals and vaccinations and things like that, and the extent to which they keep people sick to treat them, but they do not come up with a cure, and that the cost of pharmaceuticals is hostile to any reasonable quality of life and standard of living to the ordinary citizen. And this has been going on for some time. I mean, from the time I've been able to follow this. I know that this has been an argument in the world system. So you think that that kind of position really creates the condition immediately that, let's say, 15 or 20% of the population really doesn't want anything from Big Pharma? I mean, you think that is part of it?
Oh, yes, I think it's certainly a contributing factor. I think people are very frustrated. When we look at some of the news, it's very disenchanting. I myself have been disenchanted by it, to see some of the contentions, the issues that have ethical repercussions, where we hear about this vaccine inequity. So, whether it's countries getting access to vaccines, the cost of the vaccines, hearing about the profit margins that companies are making, it can be very frustrating. But we need to separate out that business side, that capitalist side of the situation, and, as I said, not conflate them. So, because a company is probably practicing in contentious ways, it does not take away from the fact that the drug is effective, or it's useful, or it's saving lives. Yes? So we could debate that, and it certainly is a worthy debate that needs to continue, but we need to separate that out from the purpose of the vaccine. Yeah. Now, it's there's so many things that come into it. So, for example, the idea that they may be wanting to make people sick, or not have as effective a solution as possible to keep people having to take vaccines. However,
not to make people sick, but to keep them in a situation of dependency on the drug.
Reliant on it.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And for that, I would say is, while there is this issue of the ethics of companies, I think we also need to trust in science and scientists and researchers, and that some of them do operate ethically. That we can't say that there's a huge conspiracy of all scientists around the world to keep people reliant on a particular substance, drug, etc. That really is also not an effective strategy for managing health and illnesses. So I think we have to wait up. Often it's a balance of probabilities. Nothing is ever 100%. So we're not saying that people don't have valid points to make, but when we weigh up the probabilities, for me, for my family, for my community, for our country, is it safer for people to take the vaccine? Yes, because the statistics speak for themselves. Companies aside, conspiracy theories aside, what we do know is that if you are unvaccinated, you are at least 10 times as likely to die from this virus,
Yes.
or become hospitalized.
All right.
The figures speak for themselves.
Okay, and I'm going to ask you the final question, and that has to do with another matter that you said that interested me. You said that if an individual does not have a strong enough sense of the collective and his or her responsibility in that, that can affect his attitude towards whether they take the vaccine or not. And I'm asking you a two-part question there. One, I know what that means and what you are saying, so maybe you could elaborate a little bit on it. But the deeper question I want to ask is, do societies which have a collective sense of self as a nation, as a people, as a community, have a better chance of coping with a crisis like this than one in which the democratic, what can I say, the democratic fissions in the society kind of fuel non-cooperative common good behavior. I don't know if I made myself clear with the question.
Yes, I think you have. But what I also think it's an excellent question, one that I think is going to keep researchers and scientists busy for years to come. When we have all of the data and we can look back and we can see if collectivistic societies manage certain aspects better, when we look at, say, some of the health outcomes, the mental health outcomes as well, to see if these things play a role. What I can say, in the absence of any specific research now to evidence that, is that what we do know is that some of these mental health and psychological outcomes are very pressing and prevalent. People are very concerned. People have very high levels of anxiety. And we're almost 2 years into the pandemic, and this has not gone away. As we are realizing, we're going to have to live with this pandemic for a while to come yet. So the idea is then, how do societies figure out how to manage, and not just at the individual level? So this idea of collectivistic responsibility means that we don't just think about ourselves and our personal circumstances, but we also care about what's happening in our communities. And so the idea of being our brother's keeper,
Yeah.
that, as I mentioned before, you might think your personal risk is low, but what about those that you come into contact with?
Yes.
Now, you raised the issue of systems of government. And I think that is also going to be an interesting one for the research, because we could separate those, the systems of governance, from societies which are more collectivistic or more individualistic. So I'll give you an example. Societies like India, China are thought to be more collectivistic than, say, countries like the USA. And as for the Caribbean, I think we might be a bit of a blend. I think we have many elements of that collectivistic, but also some of the independent, individualistic side. So I think it is something that you raise an excellent point, and it's something we have to monitor to see what the relationship between all these factors are.
All right. Dr. Khan, we've got to close it up now because we have to break for the news with Andrew Chan. But I want to say, I'm not easily impressed by bright people because, I mean, in today's world, everybody is educated and bright. But I want to say you really impressed me this morning, and I'm really more impressed by your thoughtful, well-considered, and insightful answers about human nature and human behavior, and the very practical and easy way you communicate those ideas. I want to thank you very much for being on my program. I appreciate it, and I learned a lot.
Thank you, Dr. Tuare. That's very kind and generous of you, and it's been a pleasure.
All right, then. This is Brighter Morning with Bo. We've been talking to Dr. Katijah Khan of the Faculty of Medical Sciences. She's a clinical psychologist, and we've been talking about why you have so much vaccine hesitancy, and she was very, very good and straightforward and simple in her explanation of some of the reasons. Thank you very much. This is Brighter Morning with Bo. When I come back next week, so we have 3 programs, one on Monday, one on Tuesday, one on Wednesday, and I sign off for the year 2021. Thank you very much. This is Brighter Morning with Bo. I am Bo Tiwari. Thank you for watching.